Welcome to Hitting Home with Mike and Arif. And right off the top, Arif, the question is, do you watch City Council on Rogers TV?
You know what? Great question, Mike. Yeah, absolutely. I do watch City Council for sure.
Okay. I've been a more or less regular viewer as well, many Monday nights that it's been on. It's now on Wednesdays for those who do pay attention. And, well, you curse at the TV at some of the decisions that are made at the table. But regardless, you have to respect the role of a city councilor. I mean, they're not in there for the money, that's for sure. They got to be in there because, it's just their passion for the city. It's often an unappreciated and misunderstood job. But, for today's
well, Mike, I'll tell you, I mean, I watch it. And let's be fair, though, putting things into perspective. Sure, I watch it because I'm interested, because I had a small role to play during my time there. It's been a term since, so obviously, I'm not relevant in terms of the daily happenings, but there are obviously, it's nice to watch, none of the projects sort of get initiated on day one and finish on day two. Some of those projects that we initiated are still coming to fruition as we speak. So obviously I've got a personal level of interest there, but I would say, I mean, if I'm trying to relate myself to anybody else who's a ratepayer, a resident of the city, yes, I watch it because I'm interested, because I'm vested, because there are so many people who actually do watch City Council because they love the city, they love the community, they love
You're a member of the community. Yeah,
member of the community, absolutely.
The decisions involve all of us, and of the many levels of government, provincial, county, federal, and municipal. Municipal decisions are probably the ones that more immediately and maybe to a greater extent impact on our daily lives. And while we're going to focus forward for much of this episode, like with a look at council, I think before we go forward, we at least should take a look back over the past 4 years. We're in that transition period between one term of council and the beginning of a new term of council. So let's take a look back here just to get our place here and where we stand. And then for the rest of the show, we can look forward at some of the things we should and could see that we'd like to see happen around the table at City Council, specifically as they relate to the issue of housing availability, housing affordability. That's a big ticket item with our City Council. So the big question to ask then, Arif, and I'd love to hear your opinion on this, is, are we in a better place today than we were 4 years ago?
It's a great question, Mike, and I think it's a very fair question. However, I would say almost under normal circumstances, it would be a fair question. The reality is that 3 of the last 4 years have not been normal. So to me, no matter what, I think if we're being fair, we have to acknowledge the fact that, some would say we've gone through a pandemic and it's over and we're back to normal. Some would say we thought we've gone through a pandemic, we thought it was almost over, and it may in fact be resurfacing. And I'm not here to get into a debate on whether or not you believe in one thing or the another, or you're a pro this or anti that. That's irrelevant. The numbers are showing in the media, the numbers are showing in terms of people's talking points, whichever type of expert you refer to, that there appears to be a bit of a resurgence going on right now that may impact things like healthcare, that may impact things like social services, they may impact education. But to the question you asked specifically, are we in a better place than we are 4 years ago? I don't know, Mike. I really don't. And that's not to beat up on council. That's to say, as a reality, you ask a lot of people, and they're actually blending the last 2 to 3 years into sort of one period of time. And nobody really knows the difference between February of 2020 and November of 2022, because it's all been kind of this same, it's almost like a pause that's happened, right? So, but in terms of certain particular things, I think we've learned to manage. I think we were forced to become resilient. We saw a lot of buzzwords that came in, like pivot and agile and adapt and evolve and innovate. and Zoom. Yeah, we're on it right now, right? So we saw a lot of those words come in. So are we better? I think what ended up happening is we went from a place, and we had to take a step backwards in order to take a step forwards and get back to zero.
Yeah.
So maybe we're back to zero, Mike. But I think that while there are some things that I know, you watch the outgoing council, and they have every right to look back at their term and talk about sort of the state of affairs, the state of the union. I'm sure the outgoing mayor was quite proud of his tenure, and he's a lot to be proud of as a long-serving member of the community. However, I probably have a slightly different opinion or view of things in general. So I'm sure we're going to get into that during the show.
We will.
We got some specific questions, but are we better than we were 4 years ago? I think we've learned to adapt.
We've persevered, I think, is the term. And I mean, I've a little bit of a more optimistic look at it all. I mean, yeah, many of the ramifications or consequences of having a pandemic. I mean, yeah, once we hit the other side of that pandemic, a lot of those economic consequences, they linger, or they, you know, they have a delay, and we're still feeling our way through them at all levels of government economically. But I think when you look at our city, at least if I can go by some of the reporting that's done, our local economy is stronger. There's many new businesses that have either started up from scratch or have moved here from elsewhere into Barrie. So our outlook there seems to be strong. We've seen a year-over-year increase in the number of housing units that have been built. Have they been built to my level of hope and expectation? No, I don't think so. We're still far behind where we need to be in terms of housing demands and meeting those housing demands, especially on the more cost-effective housing component of the housing industry. There's a lot of work that needs to be done there. However, like, even though we've seen a lot of, I just want to add one thought on that. Sorry, before you go in. We've seen, like, if you watch City Council, as we both admitted, confess that we do from time to time, you see a lot of proposals come forward. Some of them get shut down, some of them get shrunk down, but finally passed. And as a result, a lot of those past proposals, we've yet to see shovels in the ground on. There's far more units have been approved for construction in Barrie than are actually actively being created right now. And that's a big frustrating point that we need to work on.
Sure. So with that in mind, though, I think, and again, kudos to council over the last 4 years of having, at least on one occasion, sort of brought that to light. They didn't really bury that fact, because the reality is, you're right, Mike, council has approved a significant number of applications, and the question was, where are the shovels? Where are they? And I believe it was either the mayor or deputy mayor. I want to make sure that we get it right.
It was a deputy mayor. I know where you're going.
Raised at council. It's like, yeah. Let's take a look at what's going on there. Now, exactly. So here are the facts. The facts are, again, going back to my point about, the last 3 of 4 years were quite a challenge. The reality is that it takes a fair amount of time, energy, effort, and money to get an application to the point where it is before council for consideration. And the majority of the members of the development cycle and ecosystem, whether it's the builder, the developer, or the banker, or the planner, et cetera, they have to create a pro forma statement. They have to create a budget, a construction budget. They have to come up with the best guess numbers based on the best available data that they have in order to decide if this project is going to be viable, if they're going to get funding to do the project, if they're going to be able to collect enough deposits to do the project and to get the green light to start with building permits, et cetera. And the fact is that so much changed over the course of that time, over the last 3 years, that just because something was before council, well, if the cost of materials and goods changed, if there was a labor shortage, if there's supply chain issues that had an impact, et cetera, that doesn't matter if it gets approved at council. If the numbers no longer work, they couldn't put a shovel in the ground, or they would be foolish to put a shovel in the ground. We did see, and I don't want to rehash old shows too much, we did see a couple of scenarios where developers pulled out, or developers went back to the borrower and said, hey, or the buyer, hey, if you want to buy this house, you got to come up with another $100,000. Nobody liked those stories. I'm sure it didn't well for the developer, that kind of thing happened, and that's part of the reality. So I'm not going to lay that blame by any stretch at the foot of council. That's part of the economic cycle. In terms of, though, how strong the economy is, Mike, I have a differing opinion than you do. I believe, and that is that I believe that it's been artificially supported and stimulated by subsidy or by artificially low interest rates and numbers. And we've talked about that over a number of years. So to say that the economy is strong, I think the economy was getting a false boost. It's kind of like drinking an energy drink. You're getting a false boost of energy, but at some point that's going to peter off. And I personally believe that while we may have seen some investments and we may have seen some doors staying open, I'm not positive that those businesses are in as healthy as a position as the media or other people would like to say they are, and give themselves a pat on the back.
Yeah, and that remains to be seen. And with time, we will, we'll see if your points there hold true.
I'd love to be wrong.
To some degree, at least they will. I'm quite sure of it. I think another component of the, that those number of approved units that have yet to be built. And this is something we touched on in a previous show that I pointed out. And this is just my own assumption on this. You can tell me how right or wrong you think I might be. But when you get those proposals coming forward, and then there's the back and forth with council, and council is getting pressure from residents who live around the property where the proposed development is supposed to take place, to make that either go away or make it smaller. What often ends up being approved is far less of a project than what was originally proposed. And I do appreciate that's a game back and forth. You aim high and you settle, but sometimes what you end up with is less than you anticipated. And then suddenly the numbers don't work for you. So you have developers and investors who now have an approval for a property far less than they anticipated having. The numbers don't work, so they just sit back on that property and they don't move forward. I think that probably comes into play more than we think on many of these sites.
Yeah, Mike, I would agree with you. I mean, I do think that before our council here locally in Barrie, we have seen developers or builders, different seasoned or tenures as in the industry, and certainly for a first-time builder or developer, that can be a real struggle. I think the more seasoned ones who are hiring planning professionals, et cetera, they're well prepped to go in asking for more because they figured out the system, and it's not them playing the game, it's them playing the game, it's the politicians playing the game, it's the NIMBYs playing the game, it's the residents playing the game, etc. And so since everybody's playing the game, well, then I guess you got to play the game, because you're going to go in and you need to come out with something that you believe is going to be viable. And so that does happen. And so in terms of where we stand right now and where we're going to be, we all know we have a housing availability challenge. We have a supply challenge. The province has finally accepted that, and we'll talk about that when we get back from the break, I'm sure. But the reality is that well, listen, I'm going to plant a little seed. If we're going to go to the break, Mike, and when we come back, let's talk about what council should be doing. I think we're going to lean in that conversation a little bit about what they really should be doing and how to address these kinds of challenges.
Or at least could be doing. Yeah.
Well, okay.
It's not on you and me to tell them what to do, but we can put our suggestions in as citizens on what
title of the show is from the Sidelines. We got to go to break, Mike. When we come back from this break, though, let's dive right into that. So stay with us for more Hitting Home with Mike and Arif on Rogers TV Barrie.
Welcome back to Hitting Home with Mike and Arif. Good first segment, Arif. I think we should tell our viewers that just where we are. I'm at home in my home studio today. You, like James Rockford, you're in the trailer on the beach in Florida. And so some of the audio and video might be a little bit compromised at times. How are you feeling from your end, Arif? Are you able to hear everything that's going out here?
You know what? It's fantastic. I can hear you fine, but the reality is, yes, sometimes the viewer's going to get a bit of an unpleasant, glitchy still image of me, but we apologize. We'll do our best to push through this. It's kind of the van down by the river scenario. Yes. But sunny Florida is great, but the cell reception, it's not as good as in Canada. Let me tell you that.
Not as good.
So,
well, hopefully they can fix that. You need to start complaining to your governor there. And where we left off before the break, we were talking about the approvals process and developers bringing proposals forward. The ones that get approved, some of them get shrunk down a little bit before they get approved on that back and forth. And some of them get approved and then just nothing ever happens. There's another challenge, another struggle that a city councilor faces, and that is on those properties that are either vacant or maybe there's some houses, older houses on bigger pieces of land. They've been bought up and they've been merged, and now we're looking at multi-residential development for those sites. And there's resistance. You've sat on city council. You know what that's about. What's it like being on the receiving end of that when the gallery is full of frustrated residents who don't want to see that proposal going forward?
Well, Mike, it's a great point. Here, let me set the stage with the fact that this is as timely as ever a topic, and I know that not only is the municipal government, the local Barrie City Council, going to be challenged and facing that in this next term of council. All municipalities across the province, probably in every province, is challenged with that, and certainly the province itself has drawn the line in the sand and taken a position on it. And the reality is that in as much as there are people who are opposed to any one particular development for any one particular reason, and they all seem to send their letter to council saying, I'm not opposed to development, just not here and not this way. But the provincial government in Ontario has now basically said, listen, enough's enough. We got to do something about it. And so, of course, what is the public doing right now? What are you reading about in the press right now? You're reading about the press saying the province is doing the wrong thing. The province is doing a horrible job. The reality is, though, every single person in Ontario is saying we have a housing availability crisis. We have a housing affordability crisis. Bill 23 is on the table for a reason, and it is being debated, and the province is taking action. Whether you want to look at the action the province is taking in terms of the Bradford bypass, which isn't about housing in particular, but it's definitely related to housing.
It's infrastructure relating to housing, yeah.
Absolutely. Whether you're talking about the provincial government dictating to the Hamilton region saying you will have sprawl, and I think those are terrible words to use, but you will increase your boundary, you will make housing available. Ottawa area is seeing the same thing. And Mike, I think offline before we started the show, you had a question to me, do I think that they're going to do that locally around here? The reality is that we need more density. You brought it forward, whether we're taking a nice home that is sitting on too much land for someone's opinion and we're going to put some multiples on there. I don't know if I love all of that. I'd like to still believe that we have a little bit of autonomy in our lives to choose how we want to live, etc., should we have the resources and the means to do it. But if we are going to address the challenge of affordability, if we are going to address the challenge of availability, the best way to do it will be through intelligent use of zoning, planning, repurposing brownfields, as we've talked about, repurposing areas that are of less than highest and best use. Yeah, and it's never going to be popular. And you asked me a question, Mike, I apologize. You asked me a question about how I dealt with it and how I felt about it. Let me address that point blank. It didn't faze me one bit to have a crowded audience, because my role as a counselor, my ward elected me, and this is not about me, this is about all the people who are there today. But anybody who's taking the oath of office right about now to represent both their ward, but more importantly, actually, according to the oath, the city as a whole, they've already received their mandate from the electorate that says, we picked you to serve our best interest. So to the 200 people who are sitting in the crowd at the council chambers, hanging a bed sheet or waving a sign, they have every right to be disappointed, but I was never fazed by them. because I knew I was serving the other 149,800 people who were not in the audience.
Yeah, to be fair, you heard and weighed their concerns against the greater issue.
It's inclusive. It's all of us, right?
Yes, yeah. And oftentimes those concerns are considered. Not everybody gets exactly what they want. I've heard a quote maybe from you or somebody else in politics who said, if everybody is equally offended on all sides, then you've done your job to the best you can. But because you can't just appease one. You've got to look out for the greater whole. And as a citizen, you move into a municipality. There's a certain expectation that comes with that. There may be compromises you have to make at some point down the road with regards to where you live and your community, because the community will continue to grow. Maybe most people thought once I got in the door, I like the city just the way it is. It should stay exactly as it is. Ideally, we all want that. But the reality is cities continue to grow, housing's needed, and given the high cost of housing, more and more multi-unit residential development is needed to provide that affordable housing component to those who need it most. And that's a bigger, greater, broader, citywide need.
Yeah, Mike, so what I would say to you is this, that there were a number of people who would come before and stand at the microphone and offer a deputation and basically say, when I bought my house, there was parkland behind me and I was promised a parkland. They were never promised parkland. Maybe somebody sold them in a brochure that there was parkland behind them. However, if they did their job, they hired a realtor, or they did their homework and due diligence and went to the city and found out that land was never promised to be parkland. That land might have been promised to be a future school zone, a school site. And of course, they've got 6 years to make their decision, and they decided not to build a school there. Now it's back to the developer. The developer has every right to develop it. But that's some of the case. The other times was, you didn't do a shadow study, or there's going to be shadows all over my property, or the shadows all over the lakeshore. No, you know what? There's enough setback that you could put a 50-story building on the lakeshore in line with some of those other condos that are there, maybe not 50, maybe 40, and there will not be shadows. Those shadow studies are done just as much as Facebook members or armchair quarterbacks about viruses and vaccines and all that kind of thing. Suddenly they're all engineering experts in shadow studies and noise studies, et cetera. But that does not mean, Mike. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, to be fair, you come forward to challenge. You're too often. I mean, if I was coaching those who were coming before council to do their deputation, I would say stick to the key components. Don't exaggerate. Don't embellish, because it loses integrity, and you lose that counselor who may otherwise be listening, considering your point. But when you start talking about exaggerated shadow studies, or that the neighborhood's going to go to hell in a handbasket and the project's going to attract all the wrong people, and that's 90% of those deputations have that. Stay away from that. Just stick to the key fundamental points, and you'll have.
I'll tell you, Mike. I'm smiling because I remember it was right around my very first minute on council when somebody came forward to a development that was right in my neighborhood, and I might have at the time been not related by marriage, but distant enough where it wasn't a conflict, but I declared the conflict and I stayed out of it. But I remember one deputant basically saying in front of council that by building multi-units, and it was only townhouses, it wasn't condos, it wasn't apartments, but by building townhouses, you're going to attract drugs and prostitution to the neighborhood. And you can't stop people from saying whatever they're going to say, but boy, you did just alienate a huge portion of the population by suggesting that. Here's the thing, though.
The caliber of your argument goes down considerably once you've uttered those words. Yeah.
Here's the fact, though. It's not that a counselor who's about to sit down for the first time in that chair should ignore the people in the audience. You represent everybody, and that's my point. And I don't think I might not have said that 100% correct when I said I'm also there, not I'm just there to represent the other 149,800 people in the city, but you're there to represent all. And you're 100%, Mike, correct. Stick to the facts. And that's hard for people to do because, again, the neighborhood is not expected to be planning experts. But if you are going to hire a planner to oppose a plan, then follow their guidance, and they will guide you likely to say, stick to these key points that are what council has to consider.
Yeah.
When I objected to certain developments, it was based on fact. It was based on planning criteria. It was based on needs. I mean, I'm sorry, but a 6-lane roadway going through town or a 4-lane roadway through town is not going to be severely impacted by 50 homes being developed at the corner of Ferndale and Essa or something like that. Yeah. However, I also objected about quality because I may or may not have been factually correct, but I wanted to put in place that you could just see that there are some builders who have come to town with no vested interest in making the community actually a better place. And that the workmanship is going to be questionable.
Oh, yeah. The checks and balances need to be there for sure.
So I'm a huge proponent of council maybe sinking their teeth in a little bit more with setting some expectations with site plan approval and oversight from a municipal perspective, that at every stage they want to have a little bit more say and input on ensuring that what is being presented on these beautiful shiny brochures or PowerPoints is in fact going to be built, and they're going to use the highest quality workmanship material. Because if you look at some municipalities compared to our municipality, it's amazing what they can do for the same dollar with different products. And I think that should be something that we should lean on the developing community to ensure that they're developing quality product as well.
Yeah, and I think going forward, we can expect that the proposals of the provincial government to become more involved and have more of a say in what happens at the municipal level with development. That is in all likelihood going to happen. So a lot more direction is going to come there, and it may change what those outcomes are. We will see going forward how that is. And just to round out today's thing, I mean, all of us in Barrie as constituents, as residents of Barrie, we need to get a grasp on the fact, or get our head around the idea that we will continue to grow. And multi-residential is going to be a big part of that growth and development. And it's not a fad. And this is a reality. This is a necessity. This is how municipalities are going to grow going forward. And we need to come to terms with that. And I think our city council certainly needs to, keep that in presence of mind as they go into this next 4 years. That, smart growth, but Mike, definitely much needed growth.
We are at a transition point, though, as you say. And speaking of transition points, we do have to go to break. But when we come back from the break, we have a mayor who's served on council in some form or another for about 16 years. We've got the longest serving member of council in the history of the city at 22 and change years. The deputy mayor, recent deputy mayor, Barry Ward, who's no longer representing council. There is a bit of turnover at council, or some new faces. I shouldn't say
fresh
turnover,
faces,
but some fresh faces, excuse me, at council. And when we come back from break, let's talk about, well, not only is this a transition period for members of council, but it is certainly a transition period now that the provincial government has opened up some lands and dictated that we shall grow. And never more, like I said, never more than before. I don't know if that was English. Are we addressing an issue around housing affordability and availability? So when we come back from the break, let's have a little bit more of a look on what we can hope for in terms of the next 4 years locally in the city of Barrie.
Welcome back to Hitting Home with Mike and Arif, and we're talking about the transition into a new term of council here, some of the expectations that Arif and I have as mortgage brokers, as realtors, as past councillors here, and just as residents of the city of Barrie. Some of the things we like to see. We know the city's going to grow. We know that there's going to be a lot more multi-residential development within the city of Barrie. How this happens is something that is yet to be seen, or how this may be made more efficient. And one of the questions I would ask of you, Arif, as a former councillor, one of the things that we hear about when the question comes up of how can we make the process of approving a new development and getting it underway. There's a lot of red tape. There's a lot of time that it takes between that original proposal coming forward and shovels in the ground. What are some of the things you see, if any at all, that can happen? I mean, if you talk to the City of Barrie staff, they'll tell you there's a reason why it takes so long. There's a reason why there's all these steps involved. They may be right, but I'd like to think there's some efficiencies that can be found, because I think the quicker we can get some of these projects underway, the more it serves those challenges of housing availability and affordability.
Yeah, okay. So let's be fair to everybody involved in the equation, and I'm gonna set a bit of a standard here. If anybody goes and looks at the numbers on what it takes from the time an application is submitted to the time that the approval is given to the time that the shovel's in the ground, you can look at a variety of municipalities, and you can determine, sort of those number of months to completion or number of years to completion. And the reality is that, there are other municipalities who are much more efficient in turning that around. Just recently, I was watching a mayor in a municipality south of us from Barrie. It's actually referred to as Brampton. We have a mayor there who's no stranger to the Barrie area. And they just announced that while other municipalities are averaging between 38 and 43 months, they've got it down to about 14 to 18 months for an approval process. So, I can say that all I want. It can be done. The question is, someone will sit and look at it and scrutinize it and decide whether that's a good thing or not a good thing. But if the question is simply, can we do it faster? Yes, it's possible. Absolutely, it is. Now, to be fair to Barrie, Barrie has put a lot of effort towards tightening up those timelines. Some things that I can think of in particular is they looked at the zoning map, and they looked at where we needed to see development, whether it was residential, commercial, industrial, et cetera, institutional style development. And they came up with some packages that basically gave developers who were thinking of submitting an application a bit of a cheat sheet that said, if you can come prepared with this, and this, and your application meets all of these criteria, and you're not looking for exceptions on 9 out of 10 of those criteria, we can probably fast track you in an expedited manner. And I'm not going to tell you exactly what that shortcutting in terms of time was. It was significant. So everybody's got a role to play. So if developers are coming to the table, knowing what the city is looking for, and that developer wants to disregard these ideals that the city has set forth, whether it's council mandating what those ideals are, or whether it's prescriptive under the law and zoning law, that's up to the developer to figure out. So again, everybody has a role to play. A council has to decide that they are going to direct staff, that staff will be receptive to all applications coming in, and we need to see growth. But there's always a double-edged sword to that. And that is when you get into a city like we had a few decades back here, where any application came in, regardless of what it was, and we built whatever, wherever, and it was kind of a bit of a, I was going to use the term hodgepodge, I don't know if there's a better term, a mix and match. There was no real standardization. There was no real...
We've learned, though, I believe, and we certainly have a much more concrete plan that we adhere to, I think, going forward as municipality, not just our municipality, all municipalities. There was willy-nilly growth for many decades in all municipalities, and nobody seemed to know how to get a handle on it. I guess one of the other things... Go ahead, Arif.
Yeah, all I'm going to say to that is really this. It comes down to everybody knowing their part and everybody recognizing that they have a role to play. A desire from council to accept growth. And I didn't really touch on this in my response, Mike. This is going to be a little bit in the face to some people, but council's got to decide that they've been elected and they're going to guide the ship going forward. The council's got to decide that they're not going to be afraid to guide that ship because somebody sent a nasty email or somebody came and did a deputation. If council allows under this term to be manipulated or guided or swayed by the fact that somebody puts forward a nasty email and they allow that to be the precedent, then that's what's going to happen. The public is going to see that all they need to do is to send that email or that letter, or, you know, show that they're angry. So council has to show that they've, you know, draw the line in the sand and say, this is where they're going, and choose to go there. Developers have to do their part. Staff has to do their part. I'll leave it there.
So steer the ship, stay the course, and be mindful of the pirates that are out there to keep on the nautical theme we got going here. One of the other questions I would ask you, once those proposals are rubber stamped and it's back in the developer's hands and it's okay, let's get going. Again, we said there's a lot of delays oftentimes on those projects, and there's even some of those development proposals are brought forward where there really is no intention to go forward. They just want to get that approval because it adds value to the property. Now they can turn around and resell that with a plan in place. They make money off of that process, and that happens more often than people might think. Can we create, and should we create, both incentives and perhaps penalties, like incentives to get that project underway as quickly as possible, and maybe penalties for when it isn't and when it drags on? And we see properties that have sat for years and years, and people wonder, who owns that? What's happening there? Why hasn't that been developed? What are your thoughts on those two things?
Yeah, well, in a word, absolutely. That is exactly what I think could and should be done. I'll give you an example, by the way. Be careful. It's not just the developers, and let's be careful again not to lump all developers under, paint them all with one brush. I don't know where that metaphor was, but it happened actually with the school board. And I'm going to say this, and I have no problem saying this, when it comes to the Barrie
You're
Central
not running
site.
for anything.
I'm not running for anything, and yeah, well, whatever. Dig it up on YouTube later. But here's the fact: the school board, and I cautioned the city about this, and I didn't love it. I hated it. The school board, when they decided to sell the central site, they came forward with a plan of a rezoning plan, and basically to change the planning or the zoning that would allow for this residential high density growth. And you better believe it. I called it, and I don't know if I think it was the only one who called it. And I said, this is a play. We do not owe the school board anything. Why? Because the school board hasn't listened to a single thing that the city has said. They shut down the schools in the downtown core. They shut down schools when the city was trying to actually build up the residential population in the downtown to make a healthier downtown community, a more vibrant downtown community. And what do? They shut down the only high school in the area under the joke, in my opinion, that the school was unfit. The reality is the school was not entirely unfit. There are older schools. There are schools that are still standing today that private institutions have bought and retrofitted and renovated, and they're still running strong today in Barrie's boundary. So
and on if I might cut in a second, some might say, and I'd heard that they deliberately neglected Barrie Central Collegiate for a number of years to allow it to get to the point where they could then make the claim that it's going to cost too much to retrofit and bring this building up to date. And you better believe it. You better believe it. And they did this. I don't know if it was back in 2010, 11. I've got to remember the dates exactly, but absolutely 100%. If you look at their actual maintenance and records, et cetera, they were deliberately shutting down one classroom at a time instead of giving them the attention and the care that they deserve. So, hey, look, we neglected it long enough. Oh, look, this place is in a poor state of repair. We can't afford to repair it. So it was, in my opinion, absolutely, it was deliberate. But here's the thing. The fact is that there is, as you called, I'll refer to it as paper money, or not. Yeah, it's like taking it from one, going through the paper process, going through the planning process, getting it rezoned, getting it whatever, and all of a sudden you created this value. There is genuine value to it, but there are a number of people who get into I don't want to call it a game, but they get into the business of being speculators, and they'll take the property from one zoning designation to another and turn that around and sell it. And that's been going on for ages. So that's nothing new. But I absolutely think there's an opportunity to create incentive for those to move forward in a timely manner, whether that's through waiving fees or whether that's through maybe collecting a bond but reimbursing that bond, or collecting a fee and reimbursing that fee if they hit their performance targets. Because
Why? It's not about the finances to the city. It's what is the value through the entire equation. So if there is value, because we have a backlog, because we have a demand and a supply issue, and the city can start collecting tax revenue from a property 6 months earlier, 12 months earlier, 18 months earlier, and we waive or we reimburse a certain fee, in order to get there, then it can wash. And that is a financial equation. It may not be line item for line item, but somewhere in the equation that can be balanced out. Conversely or similarly, we can look at the fact of penalizing. So we can look at the fact of pulling back, and that is an option available to the city to when they enter into an agreement to sell a piece of city land, or whether they enter into an agreement to approve a certain development, they have the ability to put conditions on it. Yeah, conditional upon. And I think that's a willingness of the city to do that. And again, I believe that is something that the mayor and council can certainly direct staff to come back with a report. I will caution that there are some members on staff who are far more reserved than others, and that does not make it fact. They will place their argument. They will caution against certain things because there are certain members of staff who want to avoid any form of liability or confrontation whatsoever.
Understandable.
Nobody ever won the battle only on defense, though, I think. And at some point, you have to decide to take a stand. But we do have to go to break, Mike.
We do have to go.
We do have to go to break. Let's pick this up and sort of wish our new term of council well in the last segment of the show. But we'll be right back with more of Hitting Home with Mike and Arif right after this short break.
Welcome back to Hitting Home with Mike and Arif. Interesting show. We're talking about some of the things our new city councilor, who's just starting for their 4-year term, some of the things we'd like to see for them, some of the expectations and hopes. We were talking specifically about the development process and how it impacts on those investors and developers, as well as the citizens of Barrie. And we had some interesting points. And one of the things I'd like to add to that I'd love to see, and I don't believe we do, and maybe you can correct me on this, Arif, is a number of those proposals that come forward are coming from people, from investors who've not been through this before, who've not done developments. And part of the reason some of those projects fall apart and never see shovels in the ground is for that very reason. I would like to see a program, or if there is one already, a better program in place, if it's not a conflict of interest for the city, but where the city can handhold, can guide, can offer objective criticism as well as insights on that whole process. And so we can get from the rubber stamp approval to actual shovels in the ground. Yeah. Do you think that's something the city should be investing more in?
It's an interesting topic, Mike, and it's not a horrible thought. The reality is, the city's going to decide whether or not it's within their domain to tell somebody that they can't be a first-time applicant. But, when you look as an employer, or actually, I think maybe even more appropriately, I would say it's up to the bank. It's up to the financial institution who's going to decide to put their money behind an application. Because before you come with your application to the city, you've got to go to the bank and decide that you've got funding and financing in place to do the project. And I think that's a great place for the bank to say, and they do this, are you a first timer? Show me your management experience, show me your portfolio, show me your construction experience in the past. And if not, I think it's up to the bank to say, we're not going to give you the money, or you got to find somebody who you're going to partner with. But I don't think it's a horrible thing for the city to have, they have incubators all over the place for small business startups. And this is no different than a business startup. So can the city look at saying, hey, listen, we've got not a cheat sheet, but we've got a PDF, a downloadable document of how to have a successful application come through.
Here's who's done it, and here's how they did it right. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, my personal opinion is it works. If you have no experience in this, and we're talking multiple millions of dollars that are going to be at stake, and you want to go and try your luck at putting in an application, I'm not going to get in your way. I think that's foolish. I think that's a really bad idea. I think you probably should have a partner who's done this once or twice before, that probably has a Tarion warranty account, etc. But, I mean, listen, there's a reason why, what is it, 85 to 90% of all businesses fail within the first 5 years. What's different if you're a first-time developer? And that's a stat. That's the government issued stat. So
you can count those projects among them.
Just the number of dollars. Yeah, just the number of dollars are involved. But do I think it's a good idea? Yeah, I don't.
The city shouldn't just sit back and watch them fail. The city should be able to offer resources to them to help to ensure that they are successful. It's in the interest of the city and as a whole that they do, and I don't think they do it enough.
I don't know. I'm going to disagree on that, and I think it's in the interest of the city to do its due diligence and make sure that they do their job properly. I also think it's in the interest of the city to not encourage somebody who doesn't have their ducks in a row and hasn't done their due diligence. So I wouldn't say it doesn't matter if you have any experience, go on, we'll handhold you. That's not their job. I'd rather they didn't apply. I'd rather they counted upon themselves to get a good partner. But there are some other things that we need to address, Mike, in the short time that we have left. And that really is the fact that, you asked me right off the top of the episode, do I think the city's in a great place? And one of the areas that I was a little bit, reserved on that is our numbers of people who are dealing with either homelessness or other issues that are social related issues. That city as a whole, that does impact the city. We're not in a better shape than we were 4 years ago. In fact, we're in a worse shape than we were
and those numbers
4 years ago. And I do, my wish for council, and I don't know that is, I'm not going to get into whether I think that's council's fault, et cetera. My wish.
It's happening across the board. You can't just blame any one council.
What I would like to see is a council that chooses to be more collaborative and less combative than in the past. I do want for this council to be more productive in certain areas than the most recent term of council was. I am interested to see and speak with the new mayor and council about how he's going to deliver upon the promises or the expectations that he set when he ran during his campaign. But one of the things that I really wish for amongst all members of council, and the reality is that there is a member of council who's former member of council who is now a former member of council. So that part of the equation maybe have addressed itself. But I would like to see a much more. It's okay to come in with different ideals. It's okay to come in with different viewpoints. Be respectful. Stop taking each other to the integrity commissioner every 5 minutes. I think you referred to that offline, Mike. And let's see a head of council who's decided that the buck stops with him actually ensure that the buck stops with him and make sure that they set a tone that is, sets an expectation of behavior and level of professionalism at council.
Yeah, and the city council, it's an eclectic mix of individuals passionate about their city. They're all coming and running for their own various reasons, but ultimately the main reason should be for the good and benefit of the city that they live in and want to represent. What we have seen in the past is individuals come in who I would call one-trick ponies. They're passionate about a particular issue. It may or may not be an issue that sits in the hands of the municipality to remedy or rectify. Nonetheless, they've come forward, and when they're around that table, we're a major corporation here, multi-billion-dollar corporation. There's a lot of decisions that have to be made. We can't spend all of our time around the council table just talking about some of those issues, however passionate you are and however significant those issues may be. You have to be able to wear a lot of hats around that table. And going forward, I'd like to see some more versatility coming from all of the members of council around that table. And,
and that's just it, Mike. I think the people who will come on as elected members of council, they are, as I've said this before, you're not going around with a resume. I've never seen a candidate walk up with their resume and tell me why. And I certainly didn't walk around with a resume. I wasn't asked to. I mean, you bring what you bring to the table. But the reality is that as a member of council, rely on, use, engage, demand more from staff in terms of the level of expertise in any particular subject matter, maintain the level of professional decorum. The mayor in the last term of council had a heck of a job, and he really did have a heck of a job. And it is incumbent upon each member of council to be professional, to act in a professional demeanor. And, they didn't make it easy for the last mayor. And my wish for the new mayor coming in is that they really set that expectation up front.
Well,
but rely on the expertise of your staff members.
Yeah, excellent. And as a city councilor, it needs to be understood, no matter how sound or significant or passionate you are about your proposal that you're bringing forward, you are just one of 11 votes around that table, and you may not get your way, and you need to be able to move forward.
Gracefully.
In the face of rejection of your idea, and maybe you regroup, you bring it back later. But
Mike, the other thing I would say is
tantrums around the table. I'm sorry, in the past few years when someone didn't get what they wanted, and with name calling and everything else, I don't know. It was very unprofessional, and I hope we see less and hopefully none of that going forward. I just wanted to put that out there.
Yeah, well, and the reality is that Mike, that you're not an activist. You're not an activist. You're a municipal representative. And if you want to be an activist, do so on your own time, and that's okay. And you'll probably get lots of support from the community.
And that's not a slight on whatever it is you may be active about. It's just the time and the place, and when to bring it forward. Yeah. And the situation and some of the issues that are significant that aren't directly housing, but they certainly are attached to that. And that are some of the social issues. Mental health, poverty, addiction, and certainly safe housing for all are issues that the city has to play a role in, and certainly the county has a role to play in that, on up the chain, provincially and federally in terms of funding and direction. The city.
Yeah, I'm glad you bring that up, Mike. I'm glad you bring that up, and we're going to have to be really quite tight on this right now. I think we got to go in just a second, but little teaser here. I do think that we'll probably reach out and have an opportunity to have that a representative of the new council coming forward on a show in the very near future, and we'll address all of those issues. But I do agree with you. I'm glad that you brought that point up. Run it up the chain. Don't try to handle everything municipally when you need the support of senior levels of government. But on that note, Mike, we do have to wrap it up. This has been fun. I'll leave it up to the audience to decide of whether it was how thrilling it was, but it was fun for me, and glad to see you on the show one more time, Mike.
Excellent.